今天的年会当中，我们也非常的荣幸能够邀请到国际重量级讲者，他来自全球云原生技术的核心组织 CNCF， 他也长期致力在推动云原生还有 AI 基础建设的发展，也协助了无数企业在开源环境当中建立一个更加强韧还有更具弹性的基础架构。 今天他将为我们带来的专题演讲，与我们分享云原生还有 AI 架构要如何共荣共创，推动新一波的技术革新。紧接着，让我们以最热烈的掌声欢迎 CNCF 技术长 Chris Anschik。Please join me in welcoming Chris.
Oh, it works. Okay. First off, very happy to be here in Taipei. I wish the weather was a little bit better, but hey, you know, it is what it is. We're in rainy season right now. I'm very honored to be here to talk a little bit about an organization that is near and dear to my heart, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF, and you know, we're going to be embarking our 10-year anniversary today, and in a short 10 years, we have really truly revolutionized the world. Almost every interaction you have, whether you call an Uber or buy something online, you're using some form of CNCF project, whether it's a Kubernetes, a Prometheus, and even Cathay Bank itself is very much powered by CNCF projects. So I'm very, very excited to spend some time talking about some of the work we do. So first off, like, hello, ni hao, have to, you know, try the local language here, very saying. It's not that hard. Thank you for the encouragement. But you know, really, you know, I think to really understand where the future is, you have to look a little bit at the past to see how we kind of got here today. So if you look at CNCF today and the cloud native movement, we are now probably the largest open source organization in the world, and probably the fastest growing one if you look at the last 10 years. We have 275,000 contributors worldwide. This is across the world. They're contributing to over 200 CNCF projects, Kubernetes being our most famous and then kind of relevant and popular one, spanning almost 8,000 companies around the world, are all contributing to this kind of corpus of software that everyone benefits to from an infrastructure perspective. So, you know, that is us today without diving too much in details, but I always like to look at the past. We had very, very humble beginnings in CNCF, and this diagram may be hard to see, but if you go online and you go to a project that I help maintain called the Cloud Native Landscape, l.cncf.io, you kind of see how wide and big things are today. There's 1,000+ cloud native things that you could kind of choose from, and about 200 of those are CNCF open source projects. So when I first started CNCF, the world of infrastructure was very, very different, right? You know, this is a very simple Google Trends data graph where you kind of see, you know, Kubernetes was first open source around 2014, right? And if you kind of look at the trends there was other options in the market. You had CloudStack, which was kind of, you know, open source Citrix. You had Mesos, which I personally worked on and was infrastructure that was used at Twitter and Apple at the time. And you could kind of see, okay, you know, a little growth with Kubernetes, but, you know, in 10 years, innovation could happen very quickly when you work together in the open and truly build an open ecosystem. And if you look at today, the rest of these projects are no longer really relevant, and basically the whole world is running on Kubernetes and Linux behind the scenes. So things could happen very, very quickly. So, you know, 10 years of CNCF, I don't have to go through the details, but if we look at the organizations involved, there's almost 800 companies worldwide that are members of CNCF. We have all the major worldwide hyperscalers. You know, you have your Amazons, Microsoft, Googles of the world. We even have big companies like Apple, you know, Intel, Infosys, Huawei, Ali. Huge variety of organizations that are all working together to build this infrastructure software that we all depend on. We also have the largest end user infrastructure related organization where there's companies that are not vendors, folks like Cathay Bank, folks like Apple, eBay. These are all companies that are building a product or a service that benefits their customers. And so we have these organizations working together with us to improve the whole ecosystem. So back to my little history lesson here is, I've been involved in open source for 25 plus years, started as a Linux developer a long, long time ago before Linux was cool and really, really relevant. But if you look at the history of cloud native and infrastructure, if you go to the past, people that work in banking probably could relate to this, is long time ago, we usually worked with one vendor, we worked with mainframes, very single tenant applications, not really flexible, but it works. And over time, we moved to virtualizations. VMware came around and popularized VMs to kind of break up and make things a little bit more efficient. Amazon came along and pioneered infrastructure as a service. Then you had Heroku for platform as a service. And then you started to have open source variations of these things. You had open source infrastructure, which was OpenStack, Cloud Foundry for PaaS. Then Docker came along and popularized containers. And then CNCF and Kubernetes came along in 2015. And what this simple timeline shows is, in about 20 years of computing, we moved away from single vendor, kind of single tenant, type of application development running on usually classic mainframes or Sun hardware, to a very diverse and open ecosystem, multiple clouds, multiple architectures, and multiple vendors. This is the future and of how we kind of operate today, and I think we'll continue to move to, especially in the world of AI. AI right now is still in the infancy, but we're seeing similar patterns emerge, right? We're starting with closed options, single vendor, monopoly, now moving to more open options, and competition is happening. But I'll speak to that a little bit later. So I love timelines, so I'll kind of go through the history. CNCF, we were founded in 2015, started very, very small with about 20 companies. If you look at that initial company list, AT&T, Cisco, Google, Red Hat, Twitter, where I was, IBM, very, very small list. Right, so started very, very simple at the end of the day. In 2016, we as a community started to grow and started to accept projects. We accepted Kubernetes. If any of you have ever worked in observability, you're probably familiar with a project called Prometheus, which was inspired from how Google did observability. Completely changed how observability works in a modern infrastructure world. So 26, we started to expand a little bit. In 2017, one of my favorite years is we had this issue of there were many ways to build a container, to run a container. You had AppC, you had Docker Engine, you had a variety of things. And so in this era, we kind of all worked together to kind of help standardize containerization technology. So we accepted Containerd into CNCF and also Rocket, which was a popular container engine, and kind of unified these technologies together. So there was only one way to build really and run a container in production, which truly, truly changed the world. 2017 was also when the rest of the industry started to notice Kubernetes and CNCF, and we had Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, and many, many other kind of big, large hyperscalers join and support the CNCF cloud native ecosystem. 2018, we started to see an uptick in serverless technology. Amazon open source Firecracker, which is kind of their basis, their micro VM that runs Lambda and a lot of their serverless efforts. Knative was accepted in CNCF, which was kind of call it a sister technology that came from Google. So we had a lot of innovation that kind of happened in the open in serverless technology in 2018. 2019, a lot of standardization came around observability. So what's interesting when you start building cloud native systems and applications is, great, I have an orchestrator, I could scale these things out. Problems happen. How do I debug? How do I observe? And so a lot of people have noticed that we needed some standardization and optionality here. So OpenTelemetry was born and basically merged two projects into CNCF to kind of birth a new standard of how observability is done around the industry. If you look at almost every major observability vendor, whether they're the big ones like Datadog or Splunk, Even Grafana is pretty big these days. They are all OpenTelemetry compliant. So it's truly incredible how this small project really came around and really standardized how observability is done across probably 50, 60 vendors and projects out there. 2020 was an interesting year. Let's call it COVID and all this fun stuff. 2021 happened, and we started to see the underpinnings and low layers of the cloud native stack to kind of modernize. There were modern Linux kernels that came around. For some of you that are Linux nerds like myself, you may be familiar with a technology called eBPF. This started to creep up all over CNCF projects. So if you were an observability project or a security project, you took advantage of eBPF to really modernize how you interact with the Linux kernel and improve how you do security around containers and also how you observe containers. So truly a kind of renaissance year for eBPF becoming a fundamental technology in the stack. 2023 started to creep up a little bit of what I call AI infrastructure in cloud native land. So we accepted Kubeflow, which was a project that originated out of Google to help you basically both build and train models, but also interact with things like notebooks and so on in kind of a Kubernetes type world. This was kind of our really first year in CNCF that we started to focus on AI infrastructure because at the time, if you remember, I think ChatGPT is only a couple years old, but the OpenAI team and some of those folks were running all of their infrastructure on Kubernetes essentially in early days and helped scale that. So this was a year when things started to, come to CNCF of like, oh, can you improve this? Can you support GPUs better? So last year in 2024, things were a little bit exciting. So Kubernetes started to get a lot more features and support GPUs, TPUs, and a variety of different, let's call it heterogeneous forms of computing. We created a new feature called DRA, which really kind of enables you to work with all these different systems. We had a cloud native AI paper kind of released to kind of describe what modern cloud native AI is. And all of a sudden, we started to see a lot of other CNCF projects support AI workloads, whether it was OpenTelemetry, service meshes started to support different methods of routing when it comes to running models. So a lot of kind of innovation on what I call AI workload enablement that year. So that was kind of like a rough little, very technology-focused, project-focused timeline of kind of where cloud native and CNCF going. So it's 2025. What's next? What has been brewing in CNCF and kind of where things may be going in the future? So there's a lot of projects these days. Some days I feel, new project, new AI tool, like where am I going? There's just, we're blessed with optionality. So we have about, from our own research out there, we have about 10 million roughly cloud native developers out in the world that are working and contributing to CNCF projects and using things and taking advantage of them, right? So that was our first 10 years. Obviously, many of you know that AI is becoming a thing. I was actually, even though the keynotes here were in Chinese, a lot of AI focus, agentic workflows, MCP, A2A, you kind of all hear these words. There's a lot of focus on bringing AI technologies in the enterprise, and this is just the reality. Like every company that wants to remain relevant has to be able to innovate and take advantage of new technology. So one thing that we talk about on CNCF is we have 10 million developers roughly now. How do we scale to the next level? How do we get over 100 million or whatever? And if you kind of look at the past, some of us are old enough in the room that we grew up with very old computers, whether we go back to mainframes, VAX, VMS, DCL. But here's a simple analogy. When Windows and DOS was released, there was about maybe 10 million, let's call it developers working and using this system. Eventually, when Windows was released, a new user experience, it grew to 147 million developers in a very, very short, or users in a very, very short time span. So what this lesson to me is sometimes the change of interface and change of working model could really grow the amount of adoption and usage in an ecosystem. I think that's an important thing to think about when we work with both CNCF and AI. So what is happening in 2025 is we are improving the user experience in Kubernetes and developer experience. Kubernetes is working on essentially a desktop experience. So if some of you, I know are developers in the room, a lot of times when people get started with Kubernetes or containers, one of their first entry points is Docker Desktop, right? Pretty easy to use, then giving them a CLI. So Kubernetes is working on a Kubernetes desktop experience that we're hoping to release at the end of this year or early next year. So everyone that uses Kubernetes is going to have a very, very different experience soon versus now if you go to the website and download Kubernetes, it's like, well, here's a binary and here's like a CLA to run basically a Golang app. Not very user-friendly, so we need something better, and we are going to work on that. Another big thing that I spend most of my time is meeting with companies like you've heard from NVIDIA, a lot of AI infrastructure companies. Kubernetes was very much built for containers and CPU management and storage. Well, the AI revolution is powered by mostly GPUs, TPUs, FPGAs, and so on. So Kubernetes needs to improve itself a little bit to support these scenarios, and it's working on that. NVIDIA and many other companies have also realized that when you schedule AI workloads, they have different characteristics than maybe traditional cloud-native container workloads. So there are improvements that have to be in how scheduling is done for workloads. So in the AI world, there's a notion of gang scheduling, which is not as scary as it sounds, but you could think of it a different way to lay out workloads. And so Kubernetes is adding native gang scheduling support in there, which is amazing. The other thing that I was working on, so I didn't talk about this, but there are now over 100 different products and vendors that support Kubernetes in a standardized way. So if you go to Google Cloud, Alibaba Cloud, Microsoft Cloud, pick their Kubernetes service, AKS, EKS from Amazon. There's a standard that guarantees some level of compatibility. And this is probably one of the most successful conformance standardization efforts in the world. And we want to do the same thing for AI workloads next. And so in next month, when we're hosting KubeCon Atlanta in North America, which is our big premier conference, we are going to announce a conformance effort to bring standardization for AI workloads. So regardless of whether you use a cloud provider or run Kubernetes on your own, there will be a standard way to do this, which I'm personally very, very excited about. The other big thing that is happening is containers, have been standardized. There's a standard ways to distribute containers and use them. Well, AI models, there's a bit of a mess these days, like whether you get your AI models from Hugging Face or pick your repository of choice. There's going to be a standardization effort to reuse some of the technology we developed in CNCF to host models and so on in essentially CNCF-based registries, which is very, very exciting. So AI models are just it's a software artifact, but maybe packaged a little bit differently with different characteristics. The other thing is I've heard a lot about agentic workflow agents mentioned today in earlier keynotes. Well, from an engineer perspective, you look at like, okay, what the hell is an agent? Like it's maybe it's like a function has an input and an output. Maybe it's non-deterministic, but like it's essentially a form of a microservice in many ways from a simplification. You have to be able to run it, manage it, observe it, secure it. So a lot of the technology that is being grown up with agents is going to now take advantage of some of the work we've done in CNCF. We have a lot of new projects that are basically guardrails and tools to help manage agents, which is very exciting. So to kind of start towards the end here is, the future in next year's CNCF is really about enabling, AI to be more cloud native than it is. So there'll be a lot more open source in the AI world. The intersection between cloud native AI will become a little bit closer, and we are all going to work on this in the open, right? Open source is here, definitely here for this day. So to kind of wrap things up with a couple minutes left is, I'm a open source, believer at heart. I've seen how open source has changed, the world, my life personally in the last 25 years. Almost every piece of software thing we use, whether it's like screens, your microwave, your car, there's always open source software everywhere. And if you look at the companies in the past, in the early days, IBM invested in Linux to kind of standardize open source, and then we had a lot of open source companies form from a lot of venture capital investment, to build things like GitLab, MongoDB, yada yada. Then we had the cloud embrace open source, and now in the last handful of years, we're seeing open source AI starting to explode. So very, very similar dynamics are happening. And what happens with open source in any industry or any technology, open source commoditizes lower on the stack and the value rises high, up top. And that's what you're going to see very, very quickly, that models, I think, are going to be pretty commoditized in the future. Value is going to go up on, the applications that you build up top. But when it comes to open source benefiting developers, like, I've played with Cursor, Windsurf, Copilot, all these things, and some of it's very useful. Sometimes it's not perfect. It's getting better. And some of the research shows that, like, open source, and AI tools, like, it definitely improves contributions. But what happens is when you start using these tools, there's more coordination, right? There's more throughput. So, there's no magic yet, right? We're still getting there in many ways. So I think that's kind of like, we're not there, but we're getting there. And so the future of AI and open source projects, in my opinion, is like, look, these tools are going to get better, but there's going to be mostly human in the loop. We need a lot more tooling around provenance and then kind of where the models and the data that come, input these models come from. You got to treat AI as something unsecure as part of your stack. There's going to be a lot of conventions that are built and formed around AI. Some of you may be familiar with agents.md, API.md. There's a lot of stuff that is essentially still needs to be established and formed to really make AI relevant to everyone. So I kind of want to end on a note here is, I travel the world a lot and talk to many, many folks. And I was looking at data last night, and Taiwan actually surprisingly is number 21 of overall contributor to CNCF projects, which is pretty good out of 180 plus countries. But my challenge to you here is, I think next year, let's get that number higher. And then 2 is, why contribute, right? There's a lot of research out there. There's a Harvard study that was done looking mostly at Linux and Kubernetes and some other open source projects. But it's very easy to use open source software. It's harder to contribute. But when companies contribute, they get more business value back, right? And that's the key thing that I think I want everyone in this in this room to understand. Contribution is not only good for charity, it's good for business. So taking time for your engineers to contribute to open source will actually impact your business in a positive way. And there's a lot of good research out there that shows that. So I'm going to go wrapping things up very quickly since I'm a little bit over time. CNCF is a huge community. There's many ways to get involved. I always recommend people to go to contribute.cncf.io for all the resources to get involved. We have amazing events all over the world. I'm very excited tonight to go to a Cloud Native Taiwan meetup, but events all over the world that you could find ways to go contribute. And here's a bunch of QR codes where we have great programs where you go learn about CNCF. We have a great ambassador community, we have great mentorship programs, and we have meetups all over the world. So with me losing my little bit voice, I want to say thank you for inviting me to speak. This was a lot of content in only 20 minutes, but I really want to kind of end with the thought that, look, cloud native infrastructure underpins everything, and the more we work together across the world, contribute, it's better for all of our business. And I'm very honored to be here in Taipei, hopefully convincing you that not only using CNCF and cloud native software is good, but the next step is to contribute your ideas and opinions to make everything better. So thank you very much, and I'm very honored to be here, and hopefully you learned something new today. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your insightful speech. Thank you.